Okay, hi everyone. First of all, thank you to our speakers, Dr. Emily Landau and Brigadier General Yossi Kupperwasser. Thank you for taking your time to speak to journalists today. As you know, we'll be speaking about Iran, Israel, the P5+1 and the bomb. We'll start with a presentation by both of you, please, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So thank you again, and it's yours.
Okay, so you want me to go first? I'll say a few words first. Ladies first. Okay, well, after the last few days, I mean, there's been so much media attention to the nitty-gritty of what's going on in Lausanne and who's coming out of the room and who's going in the room and what statements they're making at what time. And I mean, a lot of attention to these very minute details of the negotiation. And I have a feeling that sort of the real issues are being pushed to the sidelines and we're forgetting to pay attention to those and try to assess where the actual issues stand and not where the people are standing. So when we push all the, sort of babbling aside, I think we find those of us who are not party to the negotiations and are relying on you, on the media, for our information, is that we actually know very little about where things actually stand on all of the substantive issues, and what, if any, agreement has been achieved on any of these issues. We don't even know if there's going to be, first this was supposed to be a framework agreement. Then about a month or maybe more ago, it was watered down to an understanding. Then last week we heard that this understanding might actually just be a verbal understanding and there won't be anything written down. I can't understand why anyone would think that a verbal understanding with Iran on this issue would have any meaning, because even when we have agreements that are written down, like the interim agreement, we find that the day after the agreement is achieved, there's already a battle of interpretations, and that's when stuff is written down. So what's going to happen when the things are not even written down but are left at the level of verbal agreements? I dare to say that this will not be too significant, and I have the feeling that this is just in order to provide something, anything, so that there's a justification to continue on, because of course the rhetoric on the 24th of November in the immediate aftermath of the decision to postpone and to extend the talks was that if they're not able to get a framework agreement, they'll have to reassess whether there's reason to continue with the other 3 months to the comprehensive deal. But of course, nobody wants to be in that place where they say, no, we don't have enough agreement and this isn't working, and therefore the P5+1 are desperately seeking something. I think it's interesting that this morning, at least I heard on one of the reports, that Fabius left, the German foreign minister left, Kerry is still there, and I'm wondering whether we've reached the stage where the Europeans are already saying to Kerry, look, this isn't working. We've been sitting and discussing these things for so long. We're not reaching the agreement that we want to reach. We've been in this last crunch for a week, and we're just sort of treading water and not getting anywhere. And they left for other meetings, for other appointments that they had. So we'll see. I just heard from Yossi that the latest is that there will be some kind of verbal announcement, I guess later on today. But I think really we have to focus on the issues at stake and try to push all of this stuff surrounding as I said, the nitty-gritty of the negotiation to the sideline, and ask clear questions about stockpiles, the stockpile of low enriched uranium, the vast stockpile, I should say, of low enriched uranium that Iran has and that it continues to hold under the terms of the interim agreement. There's enough low enriched uranium there to produce 5 to 6, maybe even 7 nuclear devices if that uranium is enriched to higher levels. We thought several months ago that there was the beginning of some kind of deal in that regard. I think this was first reported in the New York Times by David Sanger, that there was some agreement that the stockpile would be sent out to Russia. No one at that time, denied that there was an emerging agreement about that, and I think all of us, again, outside the official circles, we're assuming that perhaps something is congealing in that regard. And then yesterday or the day before, of course, we heard the Iranians say, no, they're not shipping out stockpiles. And then we heard the bizarre announcement from the State Department saying that, they're not breaching anything because there was never an agreement that stockpiles would be sent out. So even this one issue on which we thought there was at least an emerging agreement, and obviously this is one of the important issues on the table, it seems that there was never agreement, if we're to believe the State Department statement that was issued. Another important issue that we know is mentioned sometimes as the sticking point, this is maybe something else I should say, that almost every day we hear about 3 sticking points or points in dispute, and every day it seems to be a different 3 points. And then we never find out, what the follow-up is with the ones that were sticking points before. Have they been resolved, or are they just pushed to the sidelines now and we're focusing on other sticking points? In any case, research and development into advanced centrifuges is one of the issues clearly on the table. It seems to be a sticking point. This has been a serious issue from the interim deal. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why the narrative that has been presented, especially by the Obama administration, whereby the interim deal froze Iran's nuclear program and even set it back in some respects, is simply not the case. Because, for example, the work that Iran has been doing, research and development into advanced centrifuges, that has continued over the past year in the months of negotiations. And if Iran continues working on research and development of more and more advanced centrifuges that spin faster and faster than the ones that they are currently using, that cannot be considered as the nuclear program is frozen. So this is another issue. Iran is continuing to work on it. We know that Iran worked very hard to convince the P5+1 at the time that the interim deal was announced that it did not preclude them from working on research and development into advanced centrifuges. So we know how important that is to Iran. I would even say that, not I would even say, but the way I normally explain this issue is that if you think of the enrichment to 20% and the advanced centrifuges as functional equivalents as far as Iran's ability to move to breakout. And what that means is Iran can move quickly to breakout either because it starts with 20% enrichment and then very quickly can go to 90%, or it uses very advanced centrifuges and then it can also go very quickly. So what Iran did basically in the interim deal is they said, okay, we'll stop one route to quickly getting highly enriched uranium, but we're making very sure that we're keeping the other route, the work on advanced centrifuges.
So they are equivalent in the importance.
They're functional equivalents, exactly, in terms of their importance for Iran's breakout capability. So in the interim deal, Iran actually made sure that its breakout capability was not undermined. So the whole narrative of the interim deal freezing and even rolling back Iran's nuclear program is not the case. Iran continued to enrich uranium. It was even enriching more to 5% because the centrifuges that previously had been enriching to 20% were now enriching to 5%. They continue to work on R&D, as I said, on the advanced centrifuges. And really the only significant thing that they stopped is enriching to 20%, but they kept the functional equivalent. We don't know what's going on with the number of centrifuges. Of course, everyone now knows to cite the number of 6,500. Perhaps Iran has agreed to that. I'm not sure that that's the final word. But even then, to frame that as an Iranian concession would be a little bit bizarre when we know that at the beginning of this negotiation, the P5+1 were saying we will allow only a very small enrichment capability, maybe 1,000 centrifuges. Then it was maybe 1,500 to 2,000 centrifuges. Then over the summers, at some point we heard, well, it could be 4,500 centrifuges. Now the number is 6,000 or 6,500. So the real dynamic here is not Iran conceding to lower the number perhaps of operating centrifuges from 9,000 to 6,500, but rather that the international community has been making concession after concession after concession to Iran's position. And I'll say a word in a minute about these concessions and who's the one that should be making concessions and who is actually making concessions. We don't know what's going on with the nuclear facilities, neither Arak or Fordo. Arak, we thought maybe there's some deal that whereby they will reconfigure this heavy water reactor. Again, at the beginning, the P5+1 said, the Americans said very clearly, Iran has no civilian need for a heavy water reactor. Still, they're willing for Iran to keep the heavy water reactor, to reconfigure it in a manner in which they will still be able to produce plutonium from that reactor at a very reduced rate, but they will still be able to produce it. And when you think about the fact that Iran is working on both routes to the bomb, uranium enrichment and plutonium, if the rate, they're slowed down a bit from Iran's point of view, as long as that route is open, they're willing to perhaps make that concession, but still, we don't know where that stands today. Conceivably tomorrow, the Iranians could say, no, we're not even willing to do that. And Fordo, of course, again, the clear demand of the P5+1 was to close Fordo. Then we heard it would be open for research. Now, in the past week, we heard a further concession that hundreds of centrifuges will be allowed to operate there, not enriching uranium, albeit. However, obviously, if Iran at some point decides to leave this agreement, they will be able to transfer to operate those centrifuges, obviously, in the role of enriching uranium.
But what do they work for if not for enriching?
There are other materials, and they're for medical isotopes and civilian uses, but not enriching uranium. But it is the same centrifuges operating. And we don't know what's going on with verification. The Americans especially, at the outset of this process, said, don't worry about any agreement. We will make very sure that there will be very strong and comprehensive verification measures, inspections, etc. Now it seems that has been watered down. And the only really effective verification in this case, when we're talking about a state that is a determined proliferator and has been violating the NPT provisions for years, you need verification that is of the type of any place, any time. That's the kind of verification you need. It doesn't seem that is going, that's where they're going on the verification front. But as I said, we have heard very little about the verification regime. We don't know where that stands. And then there are the even harder issues. First and foremost, the weaponization issue. PMDs, the possible military dimensions, the 12 questions that the IAEA has about Iran's actual weaponization work. Not uranium enrichment, which is dual-use technology where Iran can give their civilian excuses for what they're doing. No, I'm talking about the hardcore weaponization work. When you work on the neutron initiator for a nuclear explosion, you can't give a civilian explanation for that. The IAEA has questions about Iran's work in this regard. Almost all the intelligence services agree that Iran was at least working on a military nuclear program up until 2003. As you well know, there's a discussion of whether and how long that continued after 2003. Even the head of the IAEA has raised questions whether Iran indeed stopped all of that in 2004, but even if they stopped in 2004, it means that up until 2004, they were working on a military nuclear program in direct violation of the NPT, in direct contradiction to Iran's narrative, because Iran says, we have never worked on a military nuclear program. We are not working on a military nuclear program, and we have no intention of working on a military nuclear program. That issue needs to be cleared up, and it needs to be cleared up, to my mind, in any comprehensive negotiation over a comprehensive deal. Because if you enable Iran to continue with that narrative whereby they have done no wrong, this enables them to continue to say that sanctions are legitimate and that they are illegal, because there's no reason that Iran should be under any forms of punishment, because Iran has done no wrong. Moreover, of course, I think this is also well known, if you want to have good verification down the line, it's a good idea to know how a state has cheated in the past. That gives you a lot of important information for getting your verification right down the line. So there are different reasons why weaponization needs to be on the table. It needs to be cleared up. Iran's narrative needs to be undermined and exposed for the untruth that it is. But the P5+1 seem to be signaling that this is not on the agenda right now. Maybe it will be connected to the rate of lifting sanctions after a comprehensive deal is achieved. But I think everyone needs to remember that after there's a comprehensive deal, all leverage on Iran will be tremendously weakened. So any thoughts about getting Iran to give answers to things that they have been stonewalling for years, when the sanctions are no longer biting as they were, I think is not presenting a very serious position. Two other issues, the ballistic missiles obviously are not on the table. They should be on the table. Ballistic missiles are one component of a nuclear weapon. I think it's just totally illogical to accept when Iran says that these are non-nuclear and they won't discuss them, but it seems that this is off the table. That's a big problem. And another issue that was raised in a few articles just over the past week, it's something that people know about at certain levels, or different levels, let's say, of certainty, but it's something where there are at least serious suspicions, and I'm referring to cooperation with North Korea in the direct nuclear realm. And articles that, as I said, have been published in the past week. This is a lingering issue, but it would not, I think, surprise anyone tremendously that Iran is cooperating with North Korea, perhaps even working on components of nuclear weapons in North Korea, but for Iran. We know that North Korea was the one that was building the nuclear reactor in Syria. We know about Iran's strategic relations with Syria. So there seems to be some kind of strategic triangle there. I'm not saying anything with an exclamation point, but I am saying that there's something here that definitely needs to be looked into. Overall, I want to say, and then turn to Yossi, the sense we're getting is that the P5+1 are making more and more and more concessions to Iran, that Iran is remaining intransigent, entrenched in their positions, not making really any meaningful concessions. And when Iran sees the international community making concessions, obviously they're waiting for the best offer. That would be quite rational from their point of view. And I just want to say as a final word, this negotiation is not about two sides having to make equal concessions in order to reach a shared goal. That's not what this negotiation is about. This negotiation is about one state who is a violator of the NPT and a group of 6 states that have the responsibility of bringing that violator back to the confines of the NPT. So these parties are not equal, and they don't have an equal responsibility to make concessions. In fact, almost all the concessions need to be made by Iran. The P5+1 have done nothing wrong here. They have no responsibility to make concessions to Iran. Now, I'm not blind to the fact that when you're in a negotiation, there will be some degree of concession making, maybe helping Iran save face. That's always part of a negotiation. But what we're seeing now emerging is the P5+1 actually are the ones that are making about, the lion's share of the concessions, and Iran, the one that should be doing that, is really not demonstrating that they're making any concessions. This dynamic is very bad, and it will lead to a bad nuclear deal. I'm saying this in terms of understanding a negotiating dynamic. So without even knowing all of the particulars, I can say that if this is what's happening in the negotiation, my best assessment is that this will end with a bad nuclear deal.
Thank you, Emily, and really, Emily touched on so many of the issues that are on the table over there in Lausanne and have been on the table when discussing this Iranian military nuclear program throughout the many years that this has been discussed. Those topics on which I fully agree with Emily with all her remarks, I just add one issue she has omitted because she had such a long list, and which is the duration of the agreement. It's also a major problem there because it seems that the international community, or at least part of it, is ready to put a cap that is not that far in the future. And if we're talking about 10 years, double digit, as President Obama said, this is ridiculous. 10 years are nothing. If this cap is not conditioned on a change in the policy of the Iranians, then at one point we shall give this very radical regime legitimacy to move forward towards a nuclear weapon without any ability to stop it. This is extremely irresponsible. But since Emily touched on all those issues that are there, and I fully agree with her, I want to emphasize some other elements in those discussions. The first, I would say that the most troubling issue here is that these negotiations are being conducted on a certain worldview that is, in my mind, somewhat detached from reality. This worldview says that Iran, if it is ready to accept certain limitations, much softer limitations than one should have had on it, but if it is ready to accept certain limitations on its military nuclear program, can turn into a positive party in the Middle East and play a positive role in the region. How can anybody say that? Iran is playing a major negative role in the Middle East. Iran is committed to destabilization of most of the regimes in the Middle East that are against it. Iran is committed to support radical elements in the Middle East in their fight against Israel. Iran is committed, as was said yesterday by its IRGC commander, to destroy the state of Israel, to annihilate it. It's Iran. This is the nature of the regime. This is what this regime is all about. This regime is a mission, and its mission is to change the Middle East, and therefore thereafter to change the world order entirely. That's why they want to have a nuclear weapon. So yes, they're not stupid. They understand that there are points along the way that you have to slow down a little bit because you still don't have it, so you can't run. But by enabling them to slow down a little bit, but continue to move towards this target, when they are not changing the nature of the regime, this is wishful thinking, to think that they will play a positive role in the region. This is not going to happen. And the amazing thing is that whereas we heard the president yesterday saying that you should not negotiate out of fear, but you should not fear to negotiate, that's really the case. But the way it is perceived from the Iranian point of view is that the United States is negotiating out of fear. And the United States is negotiating out of fear that it is going to have to confront the Iranians at one point. The United States is negotiating out of fear that it will have to commit itself to some confrontation that may cause some instability and some danger to American interests. And the premise upon which the Iranians look at the West, and especially the United States as a great Satan, is that the West is a hedonistic entity. All they want is to enjoy life And that's why they value the life itself so highly. That's why they are fearful. That's why they are not ready to take any risk. So anything that's happening proves to the Iranians that their assumption is correct. That's why they don't accept the wonderful proposal put forward by the Americans, even when everybody says, and Israel is saying, listen, if I were you, I would have taken it. It's a great deal. The Americans are offering you a great deal. Why don't you take it? They don't take it. And the reason they don't take it, because they believe the Americans are going to make further concessions. Because the Americans are so determined, they're negotiating so deeply out of fear, they're going to make more concessions because they don't want to end up confronting the Iranians. And the fact that now, and on 24th of November there was an extension, and now there's going to be some sort of another extension, it seems so. It's just another proof that they are correct on it. For themselves, it's a proof that they are correct. So why make any concessions? And why Iran should make any concessions? If the other side is so eager to have a deal almost at any cost. And the funny thing about this, or the sad thing about this, is that the real balance of power is just the opposite. Exactly the opposite. Iran is a medium-sized country in the Middle East with limited capabilities, with high expectations and high dreams, but very limited capabilities. It cannot stand in front of the international community altogether, not even against the United States by itself. But the Americans don't bring into the game all their might. They are very careful. The American administration makes it clear all along the way, not only in this last round of talks. All along the way, the administration makes it clear we don't want to use all our abilities. We have no intention to use all of our abilities in this context. We have other things that are more important, war and Daesh and other things are more important. There we put our real assets, not on this. That's why Congress is being told again and again, don't mobilize all our might for that purpose. So of course, if you don't mobilize all your might, you don't get the best result. As a matter of fact, when you sit around the table, it is as if the Iranians are dictating the frame of the negotiations. And the Americans keep saying all the time, we have to make sure that nobody can question our readiness to and our commitment to reach a negotiated agreement, and we have to make sure that nobody can criticize us for not handling it in the way that really makes every effort to reach this kind of an agreement. It's the Iranians that should have been saying that. As Emily said, the Americans did nothing wrong. Why should they have this feeling of guilt and blame? They're not to blame. They're just trying to protect the world from a very dangerous country. The fact that the Americans give credence to the famous fatwa, which nobody has ever seen, and probably doesn't exist, is inconceivable. We know what Khamenei and his friends want to see happening. They want to change the Middle East. When on the one hand they speak about the fatwa, on the other hand, with the other side of their mouth, they speak about the fact that they're going to control the entire Middle East. That's Ali Younasi saying just a week ago. We know what they're after. It's strange. Hitler in the 30s had a long list of peace proposals and peace speeches. Nobody should have believed that then, and nobody should believe that the Iranians, that they are trying to bring about peace and security for the Middle East. They are not. So that's entire premise of concept that stands behind the negotiations. This is the real problem. That's why there's a strange thing here. What we are worried about is not that the Iranians may not reach an agreement. We are not less worried about the possibility that the Iranians will accept the American proposal. The American proposal is extremely dangerous. If the American proposal, according to the information leaked, is speaking about more than 6,000 centrifuges, configured in a manner, in a way that would it would take a year to produce enough enriched material for a bomb using these centrifuges. But allowing the Iranians to keep the Fordow facility, a facility which was built only for military purposes. Nobody builds a facility 60 meters down inside the mountain that can contain only 3,000 centrifuges if it's not for military purposes. There's no other logic. So how can they keep it? This is totally irresponsible. Not clear at all what's going to happen with the infrastructure of those centrifuges that are going to be dismantled or disconnected. I hope they're going to be dismantled, but they might be only disconnected. But the infrastructure, this is the really time-consuming issue, is to build the infrastructure. If this infrastructure is not going to be totally destroyed, then the Iranians may have again 20,000 centrifuges within weeks after they decide to break out. It's totally unclear what's going to happen with the inspection and how intrusive it's going to be. For me, knowing the Iranians, it seems extremely unbelievable that the Iranians will accept that there's going to be inspections anytime, anywhere, including intelligence facilities, IRGC facilities, and military facilities. If the Americans manage to get that, that would be nice. But I doubt. It's really, from a point of view of intelligence, we have to say, because this is not the case, it took a long while to know about Fordow in the past. If we're just going to rely on intelligence, the time that we are left with is not enough. A year is not enough. They can build some hidden facility. I'm not sure that within a year somebody will know about it, or within the time that is going to be afforded. It's not clear at all that this is going to be the case. So this and all the other matters that Emily mentioned makes this deal extremely dangerous if the Iranians accept it. How the Iranians are not ready to accept it. They believe they're going to get better, more concessions. They insist on getting more concessions. I think in this respect, two things have to be said. First of all, I hope, and I tend to believe, that the Prime Minister's visit to Washington was extremely important in clarifying to the Americans, because this is the message the American administration is getting today, not only from Israel, but from everybody in the United States, with the exception of the New York Times. From everybody else, the message coming, this is a bad deal. The Washington Post is on it. Everybody else is saying to the administration, this is a bad deal. Oli Heinonen, the most professional person on this matter, says this is a bad deal. It's less than a year. It's not a year, it's less than a year. And if the infrastructure is left of the centrifuges, this is going to be much less than a year. So everybody's telling the administration, don't go there. And because of that, I think this is one of the reasons why it's difficult to make an agreement now in Lausanne, because maybe somebody thought that there's going to be some play of give and take over there, but it's very difficult for the administration now to give more than it already gave.
Yossi, can you please discuss the options Israel has in the couple of minutes you have left for your briefing? Thanks.
It's one of the options to raise this matter. That's what we do, and I think we do it relatively successfully. Secondly, just before I go to that, I want to say one more thing. Many people say that if there's no agreement, then more sanctions are going to be adopted and so on and so forth. I sincerely hope that more sanctions will not be adopted in order to convince the Iranians to accept this bad deal. If we put more sanctions, if the American Congress or the international community in some way decides to put more sanctions, they will try to achieve a better deal, not to convince the Iranians to accept this bad deal. Now, what Israel can do? First of all, what we have been doing for a long time, and we keep doing it, and we also always raise the prices we are ready to pay in order to do what we want to do, is to speak to reason. We explain all those things that Emily and myself were describing here. I think we make a very reasonable and sound case. And I believe in reason. Reason convinces. That's my mind. And we were at a point where, for the sake of speaking to reason, the Prime Minister took a very rare move of appearing in front of Congress without the consent of the administration. Something that we paid for a heavy price. No doubt, we paid a heavy price for daring to do that. But we still spoke to reason, because we know how difficult it's going to be to find the intelligence necessary in order to cope with it. We know everything we say from the kishkes. We say it from our kishkes. We say it from our kishkes also because we are the ones who are the first target of the Iranians. They don't hide it. So we have this strange feeling that our fate is being discussed in Lausanne, and we cannot interfere. We are not party of the negotiations. So we have to speak to reason first. Secondly, I think we are building coalitions of other parties that are also of the same opinion that we are. Be it in the West, especially in the United States, or where almost everybody is our opinion, or in the region. We have many people in the region. Most Arab states are of the same opinion like Israel. And so we have to form those cooperation tools that will enable us to say what we say together to make it more powerful and more convincing. Thirdly, I think that we shall have to put even more effort on intelligence because not that many people want to listen, but at one point they may want to listen. Just give you an example for how low the listening readiness is. In last September, we were still in the government, and we released a statement that explains what really happened in Parchin. On a famous site that the Iranians don't let anybody in. So we released a statement saying what was going on in Parchin. And we said this is based on extremely sensitive information that we have, and this is what happened in Parchin. What happened in Parchin was that they were testing an inner neutron source.
The smoking gun was there.
This was a smoking gun. An inner neutron source is something that is used only in military nuclear devices, for the explosion of the nuclear device. There's no dual use. It's only for that purpose. We released this information. Nobody said anything. No, the negotiations go on as if nothing happened. And as Emily said, the PMD is pushed to the side. This is the core of the PMD. What happened in Parchin?
I think it's a good time to open for questions.
Let me join them. We'll just
Krista.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you both very much. I'm Krista Bryant from the Christian Science Monitor. Israel is such a practical and thorough, methodical country. So if you are so concerned about Iran being this close to a breakout threat, how come there hasn't been some big plan to build underground nuclear bunkers or something that would protect the population? Is there a feeling that you can't, just the example with all the bomb shelters that protected everybody last summer? Is there no equivalent strategy that could be rolled out to help protect against a possible nuclear attack by Iran, or that's just way too expensive to try? And because there are people who say, we can't really be serious that you're this concerned about Iran's nuclear threat if you're not taking any steps on the ground to prepare for it.
There aren't bunkers that will save you in case of a nuclear attack, or at least none that have been tested. I mean, there are countries that have, I think Switzerland has put a lot of money into that, but it's not clear, how well they will work or for how long. Obviously, you're talking about something, to even try to do that, the expense is just, you know, so great. Nuclear weapons have become, in international relations, what we call weapons of non-use. In other words, they were used only once 70 years ago, and their main strategic significance comes into play through deterrent relationships and through other means of using, so I mean, it depends on what the nuclear policy is of the state in question. Some states are totally defensive in the nuclear realm, others are in deterrent relationships like the United States and Russia, India and Pakistan. Other states can conceivably use nuclear weapons as for coercive purposes, and I think that's what Iran is banking on. In other words, Iran is hoping to have either nuclear weapons or an ambiguous nuclear weapon status, or be, you know, so close to the threshold that they can get there very, very quickly. We don't know which option Iran will choose and at which stage, but they're hoping to use that in order to enhance their ability to spread their power and influence in the Middle East. And I think they're not thinking of doing that in any, you know, in positive ways. Their plans for the Middle East are of the type that we see playing out already. I mean, when you have somebody from the Revolutionary Guards making a statement boasting about the fact that Iran is de facto in control of 3 states already in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, you get a sense of how Iran is looking at this region and what their plans might be. When you see what's happening in Yemen, you get another indication of how Iran operates in this region. We know that Iran has hegemonic aspirations. They don't make this a secret. They talk about these aspirations. Now, when you have nuclear weapons capabilities, other states will be very wary of confronting you, especially coercively, in response to anything that you would do aggressively in the region in order to bring to bear your hegemonic aspirations. And I would say that's probably the #1 concern, and that's why you see Saudi Arabia expressing such great concern from this. So I mean, the threat is to Israel, but it's definitely not only to Israel. There's a threat to the Middle East. And if you think about deterrence issues, longer range missiles, Europe obviously has a lot of reason to be concerned. Iran is working on ICBM missile technology. You don't do that if you're not thinking about the nuclear realm. You don't put all the money and you know, energy resources into building up an ICBM capability if you're not thinking about nuclear weapons and possibly deterring the United States even directly. But all of that in order to bolster Iran's ability to call the shots in the Middle East. And Iran is a regional aggressive power. And it's throwing its weight already around the region. And who knows in what directions it would continue to do so if it had that nuclear weapons capability. So I think that's a major problem. Vis-a-vis Israel specifically, you also get into problems, obviously, of, I mean, even if deterrence works, there's problems of miscommunication, miscalculation. I think Israel is a strong state. Israel isn't just a weak state in the region that's totally vulnerable to being attacked with nuclear weapons. But deterrent, even if some kind of deterrent relationship were to evolve, there are a lot of problems in that regard as well. But both sides would have a lot of reason, I would say, to be concerned. But when you come to defensive systems, I mean, there are arrow, missile defenses that might be some kind of partial response. But if you're looking to the bunkers or underground bunkers as your answer to a nuclear attack, I would say that that's pretty much irrelevant and not part of the story. So to make the assumption that if Israel isn't putting the money into building that, then Israel's not really concerned about Iran becoming a nuclear state, that would be a wrong conclusion.
Or would you say
Let me just add one thing about it. Our assumption is that we shall not let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's the purpose of a lot of money that Israel has invested in having the capability to prevent it from happening. And the point is that we would much better see the international community preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But,
Especially as a member of the NPT. Let's not forget where this whole thing begins. Iran is a member of the NPT. It made a commitment of its own free will to forego the ability to develop nuclear weapons. It has been violating that commitment for decades. It has been lying to the international community. It has been cheating. It has been deceiving everyone about its nuclear program. And therefore, definitely, it's the interest of the entire international community to deal with this. By the way, there are implications that go to the NPT specifically. Let's say there's a deal that recognizes Iran's right or de facto recognizes Iran's right to enrich uranium because it will have this uranium enrichment program. And this is a state that's a violator of the NPT, not a state in good standing, which even then there would be a question of whether there's really a right to enrich uranium. There's a right to a civilian nuclear program. You don't necessarily have to work on the fuel cycle. You can buy fuel on the open market. So this is a matter of interpretation. But here you're talking about a state that violated the NPT. And they'd be getting a deal that actually legitimizes uranium enrichment. What are other non-nuclear weapon state NPT members going to be thinking about that deal? What is the United Arab Emirates going to be thinking about a deal with Iran that enables Iran to enrich uranium when they are being held to some gold standard in terms of their civilian nuclear dealings because of the fear that there will be misuse of enriching uranium. So this state that is a direct threat to states in the Persian Gulf is being allowed to get all of those benefits, even though everyone knows that it has violated the NPT. That's why the case went to the Security Council in the first place. That's why there are 6 UN Security Council resolutions against Iran. That's why there are 4 of them with sanctions. And this country gets that deal, but we're not allowed to have that deal. This will seriously encourage states to think that it's their right as well, and they might want to go down that route, not to mention all the additional motivation that there will be in this region to go down that route for regional leadership reasons. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, we just, we're hearing things coming from Turkey right now. At the end of the day, this deal, if it enables Iran to remain at nuclear weapons threshold, and able to move in that direction at a time of its choosing without the international community being able to stop it, this deal could end up sparking nuclear proliferation in this region, and that would be under the term of a president who put nuclear disarmament as his primary foreign policy goal in his first foreign policy speech back in April 2009. And for this president, the fear of additional proliferation in the Middle East was his #1 reason for confronting Iran in the first place. So you wonder how, making a deal that would be a bad nuclear deal for all the reasons that we've laid out here is something that would cause the exact opposite effect of what he's been talking about and working for.
Okay, let's proceed to the next question. I just want to mention to our listeners online that you can also ask questions. You're on speakerphone. And you had a question.
Yeah, Rainer Schmidt, German Press. So there are many indications for a bad deal. Do you think that the possibility that Israel will afterwards react on his own for military strike or whatever grows with such a bad deal? And how do we regard the success of such a thing and also the relationship with Saudi Arabia in this regard?
I think that this is not the immediate question because Israel has made it very clear. I think the Prime Minister declared in front of the entire world when he was in the General Assembly 3 years ago that Israel has red lines. And it was clear when he drew the red line what he meant by the red lines of Israel. If, as a consequence of this deal, the red lines are going to be crossed, then Israel would have to evaluate and decide what does it mean that the red lines are crossed. Before that, I don't think that there's a need to look at the situation as a crossing of the red lines. But it definitely is a situation where Israel has to do a lot of things by itself because the rest of the world is going to enable very negative developments to occur, Israel will have to take care by itself of the situation. And that's, by the way, was one of the major issues the Prime Minister was trying to get from President Obama when he was visiting here. To hear the President saying that Israel has the right to defend itself by itself. And I'm sure that that's what Israel is going to do. Israel is going to defend itself by itself if necessary. As the Prime Minister said also in his last visit to the Congress, he said, if necessary we'll do that, but we want to believe that the United States has our back. And I guess that if we get to the point where we have to do something out of the ordinary, then we shall be able to count on the American support as well. But we are ready, we should be ready, and we should make the necessary investments in order to be able to do what we need to do by ourselves. It's not necessarily military moves. First of all, as I said before, much more intelligence. If in the past, much of our knowledge was also based on cooperation, I'm not sure to what extent this is going to be the same case in the future. Because I'm afraid that intelligence organizations in the countries signed on this deal are going to be very cautious in presenting information that proves that the deal was a mistake. So we shall have to be much more self-reliant on intelligence. Secondly, there are many other ways to deal with the matter. In fact, you know, the Iranians started this project in 1988. We are 27 years after the launching of this project. A country like Iran, with the kind of technical capabilities that it has, with the kind of scientists that they have, should have had a nuclear weapon long ago. The fact that the Iranians don't have a nuclear weapon at that point is, to a large extent, a result of the Israeli efforts. Not only. Americans and others also made contributions. But Israel made the lion's share of the contribution to the fact that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon at this point. So it's not that we are totally incapable of having an impact. We don't sit to the table in Lausanne. But it doesn't mean that we are not a party to what's happening.
What are you said we had an impact by other means. What are the means?
First of all, speaking to reason, raising this matter to the international community treatment. That's the main issue, and this has been the case for a long time. We started that a long time ago. This slowed down, first of all, the missile program, then the nuclear program, because they had to listen to the Europeans in 2002 and 2003 and to delay the activities for several years. Then came the Americans in, then came the United Nations resolutions, then the IAEA had all kinds of information that they raised with and they had to stop the project. Much of the weaponization project were stopped by 2003, as Emily mentioned. This was not done because the Iranians thought it's a good idea to stop. The issue was exposed and they were under pressure. And as I said, the Americans at that point also had a very important contribution, and so did the Europeans. It's not only Israel, but Israel brought it to the attention of the international community. And some people claim that we did more than just that. But,
Ben, you had a question?
On the other hand, one gets the impression, also according to your description, that there is no deal which could be even good enough to prevent the Iranian bomb. And on the other hand, without a deal, obviously Iran is determined to get there. So doesn't one realistically have to admit that in fact this Iranian bomb is inevitable?
no, there is a deal that can prevent Iran. The point is that Iran is left under discounting. Why this deal is a bad deal? I mean, even President Obama said, I'm not going to sign a bad deal, I'd rather have no deal. That's agreed between us and the Americans. No deal is better than a bad deal. The question is whether this is a bad deal. We say this is a bad deal. Why? I'll explain why it isn't a bad deal. Because it leaves Iran so close to a weapon that it is going to be tempted all along the way to move towards it when the time is right.
Yes, but the Iranians will never accept a good deal.
Why not?
But-
If the Iranians, I'm sure that the Iranians will accept a good deal. If enough pressure is put on them, they will accept a good deal. The fact is, just a second, Emily, the fact is that in the past, several times they accepted a good deal when pressure was put on them. Why did they stop the project in 2003?
Right.
They stopped the project in 2003 because there was real pressure on them. They were under the impression that if they don't stop the deal, there's going to be a military move against them. That's why they stopped the deal, that's why they stopped the program in 2003 and accepted a good deal. It's, in 2012, they were trying to think about all kinds of activities in the Gulf of Hormuz, in the Straits of Hormuz, in order to deter the Americans from taking steps against them, or the Israelis. We spoke about planting mines in the Hormuz Straits. The Americans told them, listen, if you do that, we're going to attack you. Immediately they gave up the idea. The Iranians know very well how weak they are. They have no illusions. They know how weak they are. When they are faced with real threats, they stop what they're doing. When they were, they didn't want to have these negotiations in the first place. They didn't want to have the JPOA in the first place. The JPOA is something that still, with all its weaknesses, holds them back. Why did they take it? Because there were sanctions. And sanctions at the time were really threatening them at the beginning. The economic situation was dangerous and the regime feared for its stability. The one thing that is more important for the Iranians than having the bomb is the stability of the Islamic regime. That is the one thing that's more important. If they see anything that may threaten the stability of the Iranian regime, they back off. And the Americans and the West can put enough pressure on Iran in order to force it to accept a deal in which the Iranians at the end of the day are going to be so far from a bomb that it would not be reasonable for them to take the risks of running to the bomb because they know they're going to be exposed on the way. If you leave them close enough, they always wait for the moment where they can move without being noticed and reach the bomb. We have to push them back much more time so that there's going to be a good deal. And there can be a good deal.
I have a question for Emily. Can you take us through the upcoming months until June or July? What's going to happen then?
Well, I don't know. I did want to say one word about this. I mean, Yossi basically gave the answer, but I think just to put it in starker terms, the key here is pressure. That's the only key. Iran wants a military nuclear capability. It doesn't want this negotiation. It definitely doesn't want a negotiation if it means that it will have to agree to something that will make it back away. The only way you can change Iran's calculation is through massive pressure. And this is what the international community has done wrong. And to come to the conclusion today, when we're at a very late stage and say, well, nothing's going to work and, you know, we have to accept the inevitable, that's a very sad conclusion because at every point in time, and I've been following this since 2003, at every point in time, more pressure could have been added. It could have been done in 2004, but then remember, everyone was saying, are you really sure Iran is going for a nuclear weapons capability? Maybe we're wrong about this. Maybe we shouldn't be pressuring Iran. The international community, if Iran actually is able to move to a nuclear weapons capability, this will not have been inevitable. It will be the clear failure of the international community to understand that pressure was the only key, and that pressure doesn't mean war. Pressure means pressure to get Iran to prefer negotiating to the deal that the international community wants than doing what it's doing. It will be the clear failure of the international community. It won't be some, well, this is inevitable because that's what Iran wants. The international community has demonstrated that it's not willing to put that pressure on Iran. Okay, so it's their failure, but it's not that it can't be done, and it should have been done, and this will be such a resounding failure that the implications, you talk about Israel, and everyone likes to make this Israel's issue or the Middle Eastern issue. This is a global security issue. It will come back to Europe. It will come back to the United States. The short-sightedness here in terms of not understanding the key insights into this negotiation are just devastating.
Yes, I meant inevitable under the given conditions. The
Well-
West is hedonistic.
Well, this is
Yeah,
why it
they
is
want-
so
so
important
under
for
the
everyone
present
that,
condition, the
for
way
everyone that understands this to work towards that. But just as for the following months, look, we don't know what's gonna happen, unfortunately, because Iran has seen that the international community is willing to make concessions even when they're not willing to budge. I can imagine that the international community will make further concessions. I mean, we just
So
heard
what
that
pressure do they apply
that
now?
Kerry, had a video conference with the national security team to see what America's real red lines are, to see whether he can't make. I mean, these are things that he should know coming to Lausanne. These aren't things that he should be having to check with the team. This means that he's making more and more concessions, and he wants to check whether he's not, maybe just going once. So the whole dynamic of this is warped and is proceeding in a manner that is teaching Iran that they can manipulate this negotiation, they can manipulate the P5+1, and they can get where they want to go. And that's why, I said in my opening remarks, this dynamic is leading into a bad nuclear deal. And unless the P5+1 wake up to this and stop framing this as if it's some, we have to show goodwill and the things that Yossi said as well. I mean, the Americans have been bending over backwards and not to insult the Iranians, not to be perceived as being too harsh on the Iranians, while Khamenei sits there, cries death to America, says the only solution to Israel is its annihilation, and nobody says a word. Did anyone respond to the fact that Khamenei has said over and over again since last summer, the only solution to Israel is its annihilation? That's an abomination. And yet, yes, we're in Lausanne, we're trying to get the deal, we're almost there, and all of this rhetoric. This is, it's a big problem. If that doesn't change, it will move to a bad deal. And the only one that will be to blame, well, first and foremost, of course, the Iranians for not willing to budge. But the P5+1 will have a huge degree of this share in this failure for not conducting a better negotiation.
What kind of,
Just a second, I saw Hannah had a question.
Yossi, you spoke of fear, of the eventual confrontation they will have to deal with
Hey, for the
if
people
there's no
on the
agreement.
conference.
You speak, Emily, of the short-sightedness, but the bottom line, I wonder whether is what they don't understand the dangers you've in such a detailed way described, the fact that this is a danger to them as well, and not only to Israel, not only to the Middle East. So what's the problem? They really don't understand the meaning of
They understand, but
They have
it
other
sounds to me,
interests.
but
They do
and
understand.
the other question, if you allow me, you mentioned now this point of recurrent declarations by Khamenei. The Prime Minister said a few days ago, I think Sunday, yesterday, the moves in Yemen, the attempt at hegemony in the Middle East and so that. You think that the other fronts, the non-nuclear Iranian fronts, should be included somehow in the deal?
We think so because we think that there's one Iran. It's not four Irans playing here. There's one Iran, and everything comes together because the purpose of the nuclear weapon is to enable Iran to promote its posture in the region and take over the rest of the Middle East, those parts that they've not taken yet. And if they manage to get a deal like the one we're talking here about, the message to the people of the Middle East is going to be: we not only outsmarted the Americans, which is an important message by itself, but we outpowered the Americans. And we are more powerful. So it doesn't matter how many planes everybody has or how much money everybody has. It's how willing are you to use and how cunning are you in using those assets that you have. And this is going to be the message. And so because of that, you cannot separate those things. The achievements in the nuclear realm are going to be immediately translated into the regional power game. And we are extremely worried on that, from that respect as well. Not only us. The Arab states are extremely worried about it because this is is going to be reflected on them immediately. You can imagine that Saudis probably are very worried about what's going to happen with the Shiites in the eastern part of the eastern provinces and so on and so forth. The instability in the region is going to grow. Iran's hand is going to be strengthened, and that's why you cannot separate those issues. It's all one story. And so
What I asked about, the bottom line of the reason.
and about the reason, it's not that they don't know all of that. But as I started, when I spoke, I started by saying that they have a different worldview. Their worldview is that engagement and talking these people to be a positive element in the region is the way to go about it. It has to do with their assessment that is very different to ours and to the rest of the pragmatic elements in the Middle East. That says that inside the radical camp, one in the Middle East, one has to differentiate between the ultra-radicals and the ordinary radicals. And the ordinary radicals are actually people with whom you can do business. And actually you can use them in order to fight the ultra-radicals. So that's why they think that Rouhani is a radical that you can do business with because he's going to fight the ultra-radicals like Soleimani and Khamenei on the Shiite side. And you can do business with the Muslim Brothers in order to fight the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. That's, this concept is totally unacceptable to the pragmatic Arab states, as we could have seen in the meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh this last weekend. And we also don't believe in that. We don't believe that radicals are moderates. Radicals are radicals. And some of them are more sophisticated. So they say, why go into direct confrontation and collision with forces that are stronger than us? Let's be sophisticated, let's be smart. That's why Rouhani for us is a wolf in sheep cloth. And while others think that he's a real sheep. He's not a sheep.
And also the Europeans just want to get back to business, I think, economic deals. And there's a general fatigue. Everyone just wants this to go away. And here I come back to the short-sightedness.
Okay, this
You
is the last question.
You mentioned
Yeah.
that there hasn't been enough pressure on Iran. Now, there have been sanctions for more than 30 years since the embassy thing came out. What should have been done more than the sanctions?
Well,
What could be done now?
the
Is there
Biden
anything
sanctions
we can do?
came very late in the game. They only came in 2012. So if those had come earlier, we would have been in a better situation. But putting the pressure on, and I think those sanctions were very good sanctions. But then we come to the other half of sanctions, which is that when you get that leverage for the negotiation, you have to use it effectively in the negotiation situation. And what we saw here is the P5+1 came into this latest round with, a considerable amount of leverage, much more than they had ever had in the past. But instead of using that and understanding that they had leverage, and that the Iranians would not walk away from the table and, just say that they're finished with this, they started making concessions to the Iranians. And so the Iranians realized that they got it, like all the things that I said. When you started with just take the centrifuges. They started with 1,000, then it was 2,000, then it was 4,500, then it was 6,000. Look at Fordow, look at Iraq. They're making concessions across the board. Look at the PMDs, that they're not even going to put those on the table. And all of these concessions, because they say, if we press Iran too hard, they might leave the table. But the Iranians are there because they can't get the economic sanctions lifted without cooperating. That's the leverage. But you have to be willing to use that. You have to be willing even to risk Iran throwing everything up in the air and leaving the table. Let's say the Americans pressed and pressed and pressed, and the Iranians went home. Well, so what? They would come back because they need the cooperation with the P5+1 to get what they want. But the P5+1 will not engage in that kind of tough bargain. They're scaring themselves. They say the Iranians will leave. They say, you know, all of the interim deal will just disappear. The sanctions will end. Why are they scaring themselves so much? Why don't they understand that when you have leverage, you can use it, and if you don't use it, you're going to lose. So the pressure has actually two parts. You need massive pressure, and they should have tried to get more pressure. Threats of military consequences are a form of pressure in international relations, a very legitimate one. They squandered this. As Yossi said correctly, in 2003, what stopped them, at least at that point, was the threat of military force. They were afraid that they were next in line for a US military invasion, and therefore they stopped. So, you know, aha, eureka, yes, they respond to pressure exactly the way we want them to. So instead of understanding that you're in a tough bargaining situation with a very tough negotiator that doesn't want to give in to the things that you want, and you have to be as tough as Iran and hopefully tougher to get what you want. But if you keep talking about this negotiation as if we're in some fairyland where we're building confidence and moving towards some shared goal, then you're going to lose. That's not the bargain that you're in. You're in a tough bargaining situation, and you have to be willing to take the risks and do the things secure in the knowledge that the Iranians will not just leave and not come back. And you know what? If they left and then came back, you know what that would do? It would strengthen the bargaining position of the P5+1, because they would have shown the Iranians that their tactics of threatening to leave the negotiations are just a bluff, and they would come back to the negotiating table. But the P5+1 are making every mistake in the book as far as bargaining tactics. If you're in this kind of bargain, you have to know how to bargain. And if you don't know how to bargain, you will lose. And that's what we see happening. And that is what is so frustrating from the perspective of an analyst who's looking at the way that they're conducting themselves in these negotiations and just seeing all the mistakes. And not only are they making the mistakes, they're framing it as if, you know, they're doing a wonderful job.
Can I ask something else?
If it's
Very concrete,
short,
yes. President Obama said explicitly we will not allow a nuclear Iran or Iran to have nuclear weapons. Do you think he just, I don't want to say lied regarding his intentions, or he mispresented it, or the problem is that he doesn't understand that if the deal you think is being negotiated is really the case, this will lead eventually, as Prime Minister said, to a nuclear Iran?
We have 2 minutes.
He did not lie. He really wants Iran not to have a nuclear weapon. But at the same time, the proposal is trying to promote is actually going to pave the road for the Iranians to a nuclear weapon.
He doesn't understand that, you mean?
I don't know if he doesn't understand it or he understands it and is going some sort of an auto-suggestion that it is not the case. But this is the case. This deal is going to pave the road for the Iranians to a nuclear weapon. And if there's something that's going to stand on the way, it's Israel.
Okay, thank you both very much. I'll be passing along their contact information via email for further questions.
תודה רבה.